All right, hi everyone. My name is Laurynas. I work as a product engineer at Fiberplane. Good to have you all here. Maybe to start off a very softball question. How many of you have used a Postman or an equivalent API client in the last 24 hours? Okay, so you kind of know where to start. I'll just start off with like a quick sample app walkthrough because we need a sample app to actually use the API client on. So what I have here is like a one-file Express-like API which uses Hono. This is like the full complex schema of it. It's the modern, I guess, the 2024 equivalent of a CRUD, which is an API that interfaces with a database, but then we're querying an OpenAI in the middle somewhere. And it's essentially, the way we talk about it is like the character AI, but where everything was about geese. So, this is your sort of classic 100-line application. Let's send some requests. So the first thing when I open up this API client, you'll see is that the routes are pre-filled, and I know it's hard to believe, but I didn't pre-fill them manually. This is something that the FPX client, which by the way, everything that you see is open source and available on our GitHub. This is pre-filled automatically, and the reason we're able to do that is because of this. So the API client comes with a client library, and this client library helps us to actually see inside what's going on. Let's, if we send where does AI come in all this? So the client library helps us to see what's going on inside. And using that information, we can, use the classic magic one button to, for example, pre-fill our request. So you don't have to sort of write it all up. We get here a quick pre-fill of what's going on. Does everybody can see it? Well, I think so. I can zoom in a little. And when I send that request, there's a very simple post endpoint. We got a return ID for that. Now, the nice thing about these small interactions that we can achieve using a model that sort of collects this context in the background is when we generate, when we want to fire off another request, we can insert that sort of parameter that we've received already from before. So we don't have to remember what was the idea of the one that I just created. We just sort of send the history of those requests, and now we can hit generate. And this is the endpoint that will go out into OpenAI and actually generate a few quotes for it. So if the second part about the client library, which you notice is now a theme, is that we can collect traces of everything that's happening inside of your API that you're querying and loop it back into the API client. So in the same place, then you can see, okay, we had a request, and then we queried the database for that information, and then we made an OpenAI API call. Okay, we fired off some requests. We saw what's happening. What else? We can do not just friendly testing of our API client. When we're using API, we want to test some edge cases and some paths that maybe we haven't considered. So we can switch this into a hostile mode. And let's hit this route and generate some requests. And close that. And we see essentially a hostile request. Let's see if our API has been made to handle. Well, this one was just a simple goose not found error. But that one's maybe not as interesting. If we select here, let's see if, yeah, there we go. Finally, a 500 error. So again, normally in an API client, this is all that you would get, is you sent some requests and you got a response back. But the benefit of having something like a client library is that you actually can see the logs and the entire trace information visualized in one place. Right, so this is what we can see. The error was that we've, not that we've tried to inject the drop table, but we essentially, Neon was able to sort of parse that and sanitize it, but we tried to pass in something that was not an integer. We've tested the API routes. We've tried out some hostile queries. We've gotten some errors. Usually when you test some routes and you get some errors, the final part in this process is try to automate it in some way so that like the next time I get this, like to make sure that these are caught. So I'm going to switch into my editor and open, this is Z. All of this information is not just available on the UI side, but we can query it as it's a locally running application. We can query it over an API as well. So I wrote a little Z extension that using slash commands, I can insert the context that I want. And so in this case, I can, for example, first I can insert the current tab. So this is props to the Z team for building this. But I can also now insert a trace. And I can sort of see all of that information coming in here. So I'm interested in that 500 error that we've received here. I'm inserting it, and if I would expand it, you see this is basically a formatted trace that is a useful artifact that we can send off into a language model and tell us, hey, diagnose this error, fix it, and write a test for it. And so now when we send this off, we see the error request when trying to retrieve a goose by ID. The problem is that the ID is being passed directly to the boot without proper validation or conversion. And so it sort of suggests that fix and suggests us to use vtest to test for those cases. So that's pretty much it. A little exploration into using language models for generating request data and also using them for then generating tests for validating the errors. All of that powered with something that not just treats the API as a black box, but actually sees what's happening inside. I think that's all. Any questions?
What's the topic? Is it the slash trace thing that's talking to your local daemon?
Mm-hmm. So basically, this trace, so in this case, the editor that I'm using Z, it has the sort of a classic sidebar assistant. And I think most of Cursor is another one. In some way, they allow you to sort of query different resources. And some, like Z, for example, allow you to write extensions that you can do it. So slash trace, when I write it, it effectively runs a fetch against the API that powers that's running locally.
So when generating request bodies to test the API, does the API consult like a schema to know what to throw in? Because this example was very fast. Maybe I didn't see some of the contents were just looked like a bunch of text, but I didn't understand where that came from.
Yeah, this is a good question. So this API client is currently, the client library of this API is made to work with Hono framework that I sort of mentioned at the beginning. And Hono framework, when sort of essentially parsing the routes, they helpfully include the handler for each of the route functions. So we're able to essentially slurp up that handle and throw it into the prompt and say, this is what the handler looks like. Can you generate request data for it?
Thank you.
How can I use this product? Is it open source?
Yeah, it's open source and it's available at github.com/fiberplane/fbx, or you can just go fiberplane.com.
I'm not sure I will be able to make a photo of it, but I will try to ask it later.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right over there.
Just in addition to what he asked, so I'm assuming you can give it like OpenAPI specs, right? I'm curious how I can tie this to the customer journey. You know, a user logs in, clicks this button, expect this, and so on, both for happy and unhappy cases, right? So it's essentially layer on top where I can express what the user is trying to do and look at happy and unhappy cases for testing. Is that possible? Is that something you guys are thinking about?
Not sure I fully understand the question, or...
So ultimately, there's a user journey, right?
Yeah.
There's a logging in, there's like asking for a duck, and then it's like ask the duck to go for a walk, and ask the duck to sleep, and so on, right? So I'm wondering if there's an easier way to essentially create the whole test suite based on a customer journey.
That's an interesting question. I don't think there's no like custom prompting that you can inject per se. It's really per route for now, but that is something that we're sort of right now investigating, is how to maybe fire off these requests and generate data for multiple endpoints that would illustrate the user journey in this.
The reason I ask is I'm assuming there's a dependency between the API endpoints. Like you're requesting a response of one, which is an input for the other. And so that creates a string like of requests and responses, right?
Yeah.
And so that ties to the journey of a customer. I'm curious how that would work in the future. Thank you.
So right now, like the simplest version that we have right now is like, if you remember, I sort of fired off a post request against this endpoint, and I had a ID2 received from that. And we store that in a kind of a local cache history, so that when I fire off a request against this endpoint and I ask it to generate, it can insert that parameter in the URL,
right?
Which is sort of a little bit of a background helper for you to continue through it. But we can probably make that better and more sophisticated.
I saw in the name of the module, it's called Ono minus Hotel. Which aims to OpenTelemetry. Is that a thing? So you use OpenTelemetry? For
so
that?
in fact, what's running in the background, so the framework, the TypeScript framework here is Ono, which is kind of like an Express, but with better types and cross-runtime support. And then the actual data that I mentioned, the tracing data, is OpenTelemetry.
Can you emit and I can collect those traces and send it to another backend?
Yeah, essentially, what this application does, the instrument, I would open an end file, but I will leak my AI keys. But essentially, you specify an endpoint in the environment variable, and it sends OpenTelemetry compatible data. So this, our API client is one possible endpoint, but you could also send it to Jaeger or anything that you want. Yeah.
All right, great. May I have a question as well? So what model are you using? You are with OpenAI, but is GPT-4o or?
Right now, I think what I have set is Claude, but you can, like the way it works is you just punch in your API key in the settings. I don't think I'm going to leak anything. Yeah.
All right.
You just punch in the API key in settings, and you can choose between Anthropic and OpenAI models.
Okay. And you have seen Claude working better in general for you?
We had to actually tone down, like when we initially added Claude support, I think it was going a little crazy and creative with its generated data, so I had to tone down the temperature a bit, but it's pretty good and fast so far.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks.